My wife slept with my biggest client and then stole $250, $0 from our joint account. Now she's trying to claim everything, including the house and my retirement savings, in a bitter legal battle over the inheritance I was supposed to get. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, writing about how my wife, Emily, turned out to be the biggest nightmare I never saw coming. The crazy part. It all started with what seemed like normal marriage issues, little fights, the occasional cold shoulder, nothing out of the ordinary. But one day, I stumbled onto something that changed everything. Something that made me realize I was married to a woman who was willing to lie, cheat, and steal her way into a life I didn't even recognize anymore. It began about 3 months ago. I was working late one night, as usual, trying to close a deal that would secure our financial future. Emily had always been supportive, or at least I thought so. But that night, I noticed her phone kept buzzing after she went to bed. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe a friend, maybe her sister, nothing unusual. But then I saw the name on Green, Jason. That's when I froze. Jason was her boss's son, a charming guy, and I'd always suspected Emily had a bit of a flirtation with him. Still, I brushed it off as jealousy or paranoia. The next day, I decided to check her phone again just to be sure. I didn't want to believe what I was about to see, but I needed to know. And what I found was worse than I imagined. There were dozens of texts and pictures, flirty messages, suggestive photos, and even a few explicit ones. They talked about meeting up, about how much they wanted each other, and how Emily couldn't wait to see Jason again. My stomach dropped to my feet. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I confronted her that night. I showed her the messages, expecting her to deny everything, to come up with some stupid excuse. But she just looked at me with that same bitchy smirk and said, "Oh, come on, it's just sex. It doesn't mean anything. You're overreacting. Jason is just a fun fling. You're so insecure." That was her defense. She lied through her teeth, trying to make me feel like I was overreacting, like I was the crazy one. But I knew better. It was a whirlwind after that. I felt a mix of rage, betrayal, and heartbreak. How could she do this? How could she lie so easily, dismissing everything we had built? And the worst part, I later found out she had been sneaking around for months, going out late, hiding her phone, deleting messages, even lying about where she was. I started noticing the little things: her phone always on silent, her avoiding my eyes, her suddenly excessive interest in her appearance. It all added up. Then came the money. I'd been working tirelessly to build our savings, over $250, $0 in our joint account. I trusted her completely with our finances, but I later discovered she'd been siphoning money off the account, transferring it into her own secret accounts. I found bank statements, large transfers to accounts I didn't even know she had. That's when I realized this wasn't just about infidelity. She was planning to take everything: my money, my house, my retirement savings. She was planning her escape, and I was just a pawn in her game. I was furious, not just because she cheated, but because she was so brazen about it. She had the nerve to lie to my face, to pretend everything was fine while she was secretly planning her next move. I felt like I'd been hit by a train. Every day, I kept thinking about how she stole from us, how she lied about everything, and how she was trying to take everything I worked so hard for. It's like waking up to a nightmare you can't escape from, and you realize the person you trusted most in the world was just a criminal in disguise. That's when I started to plan my next move. I knew I couldn't just let her walk away with everything. She'd already taken enough. I had to be strategic, to protect what was mine and to make sure she paid for what she did. But I also knew that this wasn't just about money or betrayal. It was about my dignity, my sense of security, and my future. And I was determined to get it all back, one way or another. After I found out about her affair and the money she'd stolen, everything changed. I felt like I was walking around in a fog, angry, betrayed, and completely lost. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work, and every time I looked at her, I saw this cold, calculating woman who had been pretending to be my wife while secretly plotting her escape. I knew then that I couldn't just confront her and hope she'd come clean. No, I had to act carefully, because she was a master manipulator and she wasn't going down without a fight. The first thing I did was dig into her financials. I hired a private investigator because I needed proof beyond her word. I wanted to know exactly how much she'd taken, where it was hidden, and what her plans might be. Within days, I had access to her secret accounts, and what I saw made my blood boil. She transferred nearly $250, $0 from our joint account into a private account she'd set up under a fake name. She was planning to run, and she had the money to do it. That was the moment I realized I needed to cut her off from everything immediately. I also started gathering evidence of her affair. I found hotel receipts, screenshots of messages, and even some photos that she hadn't deleted. I kept everything, knowing I'd need it for the legal battle ahead. I wasn't planning on just fighting for my money. I wanted to take her down legally and make sure she paid for her lies and betrayal. Meanwhile, Emily was acting like nothing was wrong. She was her usual bitchy self, throwing tantrums, lying about where she'd been, and accusing me of paranoia. She insisted she was just having fun, that Jason was just a fling, and that I was overreacting. She actually had the nerve to call me insecure and possessive, even after I caught her red-handed. Her lies became more elaborate. She'd tell me she was working late, going out with friends, or taking a break from our marriage. But I knew better. I knew she was sleeping with Jason and scheming to take everything from me. The emotional toll was heavy. I'd wake up every morning feeling sick, knowing I'd been played for a fool. I kept asking myself how I missed all the signs, how I didn't see her true nature sooner. I was angry at myself for trusting her so blindly. I was furious at her for stealing our hard-earned money and tearing apart what little stability we had left. And I was terrified of what this all meant for my future. But I also knew that I couldn't let her get away with it. I had to protect what was mine, my house, my retirement savings, everything I'd worked for. I made a decision then. I'd file for divorce, fight for full custody of our assets, and make sure she paid for her betrayal. I had to be smart, strategic, and relentless. I started talking to lawyers, gathering all the evidence I had and planning my next move. I knew she'd try to manipulate the situation, spin her lies, and probably even try to claim she was the victim. But I was done playing nice. The legal fight was going to be messy. I could feel it. Emily was already trying to spin her version of events, claiming I was abusive or controlling, just to make herself look innocent. She's always been good at lying, at twisting things around to serve her own ends. But I had the proof, screenshots, bank statements, the investigator's report, and I was ready to fight. I wanted her to understand that she couldn't just steal and cheat her way out of this, that I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything she wanted, especially after what she'd done. One thing I learned through this whole mess: betrayal cuts deep, but it also reveals who people really are. Emily's true colors showed in her lies, her greed, and her blatant disrespect for the vows we took. I never imagined I'd be in this position, but now I see her for what she is, an opportunist and a liar. And I refuse to let her get away with it, not without a fight. Not without making her pay the price. I'm done being the naive husband who turned a blind eye. It's time to take control and reclaim what's mine. Once I had all my ducks in a row, I knew I had to act fast. Emily was trying to keep her footing, but I wasn't about to let her manipulate her way out of this. I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer, a sharp woman named Lisa who had seen her share of messy divorces and betrayal cases. I laid everything out: the affair, the stolen money, her lies, and her attempts to spin everything to her favor. Lisa was straightforward and told me what I needed to hear. I had a solid case, but I had to be meticulous and prepared for her to fight dirty. I started by filing for divorce. I wanted to cut all ties, freeze her accounts, and protect what was left of our assets. That was the legal part, but I knew that wouldn't be enough. Emily was already trying to manipulate the situation, claiming she was the victim, trying to get her hands on the house and my retirement savings. That's when I decided to dig even deeper. I enlisted a forensic accountant to trace every penny she'd taken, every account she'd set up, and to figure out exactly what I was up against. Meanwhile, Emily was doing her best to act innocent. She'd throw tantrums, cry, and scream about how I was trying to control her, how she deserves a fair share, and how I was ruining her life. She kept insisting she was just a victim of my supposed controlling behavior and that Jason was just a fling, nothing serious. But I knew her game. She was trying to paint herself as the wronged wife, the victim of my supposed paranoia. That's when I realized how skilled she was at spinning lies. She even accused me of cheating, trying to turn the tables, but I had her texts, her bank transfers, and the investigator's report. The truth was plain as day. The more I dug, the angrier I got. I uncovered that she'd been secretly planning her escape for months, selling off valuables, hiding money, and making arrangements to leave town. She'd been trying to drain our account, so I also had her cut off from access to the remaining funds. I changed all the passwords, froze her accounts, and made sure I could monitor her activity. I wasn't going to let her run with everything. I also hired a private security firm to keep an eye on her movements, just in case she tried to pull some stunt or disappear with the money. Emotionally, I was a mess. Every day felt like a roller coaster: anger, sadness, frustration. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering how I missed the signs, how I didn't see her true nature sooner. It was humiliating, honestly. I thought I knew her. I thought we had a good life. But she was always hiding things, always scheming. Behind my back, that realization hit me hard. I had loved her, trusted her, and she had been lying to my face for months. I felt betrayed on a level I'd never experienced before. But amidst all the chaos, I also knew I had to stay focused. I couldn't let her manipulate her way out of this. I had to stand firm, keep evidence ready, and prepare for the legal battle ahead. I knew she'd try to claim the house, the retirement savings, and even the inheritance I was supposed to get. And I wasn't about to let her take what she didn't deserve. I'd worked too hard for this, and I was determined to fight for every cent, every asset. One thing I realized through all of this: betrayal doesn't just hurt, it changes you. It makes you question everything you thought was true. But it also teaches you that you can survive the worst. I learned to be cautious, to trust my instincts, and most importantly, to stand up for myself. I wasn't going down without a fight. Emily thought she could slip away with her lies and her stolen money, but I was ready to expose her for who she truly was. I was ready to make her pay, not just financially but emotionally, and I was going to come out of this stronger, even if it meant rebuilding from the ground up. The legal process moved quickly once I had all my evidence lined up. Emily was still playing her manipulative games, acting like she was the victim, crying her fake tears during court hearings, trying to sway the judge with her bitchy attitude and exaggerated stories. She insisted she deserved half of everything, claiming she was entitled to the house, my retirement savings, and even the inheritance I was supposed to get from my parents. She spun tales about how I was controlling, how I didn't love her anymore, all to paint herself as the innocent wife wronged by her ruthless husband. But I had the proof: screenshots, bank statements, the investigator's report, that told a different story. I knew she'd try to claim the house, even though I had paid the mortgage every month and I had the title in my name. I also knew she'd try to argue that she was entitled to my retirement savings, even though she had no legal claim to that. Her plan was clear. She wanted to take everything I had worked for, and she was using her tears and her fake victimhood to try to sway the court. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I had the evidence, and I had the law on my side. During this process, I also uncovered her plans to disappear with the money. She'd been talking about leaving town, even making arrangements to move to another state. I had the private investigator follow her, and I caught her meeting with a shady guy at a hotel, probably to finalize her escape route. That was the final straw. I went to court with all my evidence, prepared to fight for full custody of the assets and to freeze her accounts entirely. I also filed for a protective order because I knew she'd try to manipulate her way into my life again. The courtroom was tense. Emily sat there looking furious, trying to put on her poor victim act, but I could see through her. She kept lying, claiming she was just a confused wife who loved her husband and was only trying to find herself. She said Jason was just a friend, that she never cheated, and that I was overreacting. I felt sick listening to her spin those lies, but I had her texts, her bank transfers, and the investigators' reports. The judge saw right through her. It was clear she'd been lying from the start. She was a manipulative, selfish woman who wanted to take everything I had. The judge ruled in my favor on most fronts. She ordered Emily to pay back the stolen money, froze her accounts, and awarded me full custody of the house and the retirement savings. She also ordered Emily to stay away from me and not contact me unless through legal channels. I felt a small sense of relief, knowing I had taken control, but the emotional toll was still there. I felt exhausted, drained from the constant battles, the lies, the betrayals, and I knew this wasn't over yet. Emily was already scheming to get around the court orders, and I had to stay vigilant. What hit me hardest during this entire ordeal was how easy it was for her to lie, manipulate, and steal. She'd always been bitchy and demanding, but I never thought she'd cross this line. I trusted her with everything, my money, my love, my future, and she threw it all away for a quick fling and some extra cash. I kept thinking about how I missed the signs, how I ignored the small things that added up. I kept asking myself how someone could be so selfish, so ruthless, so dishonest. But what I learned from all this is that betrayal cuts deep, but it also reveals who people truly are. Emily's true colors showed in her lies, her greed, and her willingness to destroy everything for her own benefit. I realized I had been blind before, but now I saw clearly. I saw her for what she was, a liar, a thief, and an emotional manipulator. And I knew I'd never let her do this to me again. I'd rebuild stronger, smarter, and more cautious. Because after everything, I understand one thing: trust is fragile and betrayal is a bitter lesson. But I refuse to let her win. I will move forward, and I will make sure she pays for what she did, one way or another. After the court's decision, I thought I'd finally get some peace, but it was only the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with emotional scars and lingering doubts. Emily, of course, didn't take the loss lightly. She was furious, bitter, and still trying to manipulate her way out of the consequences. She kept calling, texting, showing up at my house unannounced, trying to guilt-trip me into dropping the case or giving her another chance. But I wasn't falling for her games anymore. I'd been played enough. I cut off all contact with her as much as I could. Changed my phone number, blocked her on every social media platform, and put a restraining order in place. I needed space to breathe, to heal, and to rebuild my life without her constant lies and drama. The house was finally mine again, but the emotional damage was harder to repair. I kept waking up in the middle of the night, replaying everything: the betrayal, the stolen money, her lies. It was like a wound that refused to heal. Meanwhile, I started focusing on myself. I threw myself into work, into friends, into therapy. I needed to process what had happened, to understand how someone I loved could turn into this ruthless, selfish person. I also began the slow process of rebuilding my savings, cutting back on expenses, and planning for a future without her. I knew I'd have to be cautious, especially since she was still out there trying to claw her way back into my life, or worse, trying to take even more. One of the hardest parts was dealing with the inheritance I was supposed to receive from my parents. It was supposed to be a safety net, something I could rely on after all this mess. But Emily was already scheming to claim her share of that, claiming she had a right to it because of some made-up marital contribution. I had to go to court again to protect it, presenting the judge with all the legal documents and proof that the inheritance was separate property. It was a grueling process, but I was determined not to lose what was rightfully mine. Throughout this, I couldn't shake the feeling of being violated, emotionally, financially, and mentally. I trusted her, and she betrayed me in the worst way. I felt humiliated, angry, and betrayed all at once. But I also realized I had learned something vital: never ignore the small signs, never trust blindly, and always protect yourself. I was lucky I caught her before she managed to take everything, but I knew that this experience had changed me forever. I'd be more cautious with who I let into my life, more aware of the red flags. Looking back, I see how naive I was to believe that marriage was enough to keep someone faithful and honest. I see how greed and selfishness can destroy what's built over years. and I see how important it is to stand up for yourself when someone tries to tear you down. Emily thought she could walk all over me, steal my money, and walk away unscathed. But I fought back and I won. It's not about revenge anymore. It's about reclaiming my life and making sure I never get blindsided like this again. This whole ordeal has taught me a harsh lesson. Trust must be earned, and betrayal can come from the people you least expect. But I also know I'll come out of this stronger. I'm rebuilding my life, more cautious, more resilient, and with a sharper sense of what's truly important. I don't regret loving her, but I do regret ignoring the warning signs. Now I focus on my future, knowing I've survived the worst, and that I'll never let anyone take that from me again. Now, looking back, I realize how much this whole nightmare has changed me. I used to think trust was the foundation of any good marriage, but I've learned that trust isn't given lightly anymore. It's earned, and even then, you have to stay vigilant. Emily's betrayal was a brutal wake-up call, showing me how someone can hide their true nature behind a pretty face and a bitchy smile. I guess I was naive to believe her lies, to think that love could shield me from her greed and selfishness. The hardest part was accepting that she had no remorse. Her tears, her apologies, they were just tactics, smoke and mirrors. She wanted to keep what she stole, keep the house, keep the money, and probably keep trying to manipulate her way back into my life. But I've learned to see through her bullshit. I've learned that some people are just selfish, and you can't fix that. The only thing you can do is protect yourself and move forward. I'll admit, there are days when I feel a deep emptiness, like I lost part of myself in this mess. But I also feel a strange sense of relief. I'm free from her lies, her manipulations, her scheming. I'm finally reclaiming my life piece by piece. I've started to rebuild my savings, to work on my mental health, and to focus on the things that matter: my kids, my career, my future. I've also put new boundaries in place, making sure I never get blindsided like this again. One thing I want to say to anyone reading this: trust is fragile. Be careful who you let into your life, and don't ignore the small red flags. If someone is hiding things, lying, or acting suspiciously, don't brush it off. Protect yourself. Because betrayal can come from the people you least expect, and it can destroy everything you've worked for. But also remember, no matter how bad things get, you can survive. You can come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more cautious. This experience has taught me that revenge isn't about hurting her back. It's about protecting what's yours, standing up for yourself, and making sure you don't get played again. I've learned the importance of legal protection, evidence, and staying one step ahead. Most of all, I've learned that I'm capable of surviving the worst and rebuilding from nothing. I don't dwell on the betrayal anymore. Instead, I focus on my future, one where I trust myself more, where I value honesty, and where I refuse to let anyone steal my peace again. I hope my story helps someone out there who might be going through the same thing. Because betrayal hurts, but it's also a lesson. A hard one, yes, but one that makes you stronger if you learn from it. I'm still healing, still rebuilding, but I know I'll be okay. Because at the end of the day, I've proven that I can stand tall, even when everything around me is falling apart. And that's the most important lesson of all.